is the last speaker for this seminar, unfortunately. And Koyo is going to introduce her. Thank you.
Well, you say unfortunately we can continue for the entire evening. What an afternoon. And after this very, captivating stories about film archives in Mozambique and in Morocco, we are staying on the continent and looking at a very different history, but in the same vein as in the context of salvaging, unearthing forgotten histories. And I'm very happy to have the pleasure to introduce Filipa César. Filipa has been researching the audiovisual archive of Guinea-Bissau since 2010, 2011, and the collection and the cinema practice from the period of the country's liberation struggle against Portuguese colonialism in the 1960s and the 1970s, quite similarly to also what happened in Mozambique just a little bit earlier, due to the sort of a geographical vicinity. I mean, one has to say something that the Portuguese colonial past in Africa, if there is any kind of hierarchy that one can put on colonial occupation at all, I don't think they are bad or good or worse colonizer, because I just think that they were all bad. But the Portuguese are quite particular in the sense that they were the ones who really didn't want to leave. And you can see it through the liberation movements, be it from Guinea-Bissau, from Mozambique, from Angola, and all these countries that gain independence much, much later than, say, the former French colonies or the former British colonies. So Filipa has been interested in that archive through, random, if I may say so, but positive random that led her to understand the importance of this filmic narrative, and resulting from her interest in that archive that she found in Guinea-Bissau is the project Luta, inda. I cannot say that. I don't speak Portuguese. Luta, inda. How do you say it?
Luta, inda, but that's the idea that is really difficult.
Luta, inda, exactly, which basically means the struggle is not over yet, yeah? And it focuses on exploring the different possibilities of presenting and reading and performing the materials from that archive. Filipa's talk will focus on the particular iconography she discovered in the kaleidoscopic eroded archive related to the Soviet film, also related to the Soviet film production here. And she will address the unique and today quite useful imaginary of solidarity beyond the loaded readings of its propagandistic intentions. Just to give you a very brief context about Filipa's background, Filipa was born in Portugal in 1975, and she's an artist, filmmaker, and interested in the porous relationship between moving image and its public reception. So the fictional aspect of the documentary genre and the politics and poetics inherent to the production of moving images. And very importantly, between 2008 and 2010, the majority of her work of experimental film have been focused on Portugal's recent past, questioning mechanism of history, production, and proposing spaces for performing subjective knowledge. And selected film festivals that her films have featured in include the Kurzfilmtage Oberhausen in 2013, and Forum Expanded at the Berlinale in 2013 as well, and the International Film Festival of Rotterdam, many times 2010, 2013, and 2015. And she has also participated in the context of contemporary art at Istanbul Biennial in 2003, and an exhibition at the Serralves Museum in Porto, Tate Modern, and so on. Welcome, Filipa, and she doesn't need translation for me.
Yeah, my English is also not so good, but that's how we operate. Thank you so much, Koyo, and thank you so much, Rasha, and the whole team of Garage for inviting me here. I will start. An excerpt from a German Democratic Republic film production introduces an urgent cinematic operation. The gear depicting an arena of brutal operation pauses, and the oppressor is traced in the frame by an invisible pointer. Once the target is detected, an axis is established from where the amplification of the celluloid grains will be guided. The oppressor is isolated, trapped in his double whiteness, his skin and his safari uniform. Now detached from the crowd of budded human beings, something is about to invert the course of things. From the rhythmic, industrial, obtuse machine of embodied exploitation, a cinematic hold intersects 1, 2, 3 times. Cut. Masses of people running. The oppressor is tackled in a zoom in. Sorry. And a shout on a hold activates the zoom out, the announcement of an inversion. An imaginary is about to set in. For this contribution, I selected a series of findings from a Ciné-Archaeology site located in the West African country of Guinea-Bissau. A country that actually, it's almost spelled from maps, according to actually what Philip was introducing. This is the only unquestionable source. Oh, sorry. I really prefer to have, okay, let's do it like that. Can we have image in the back? Yeah, that is good. This is the only unquestionable source I can give here, since our agency, or my agency, is against the quest of sources, origins, or tracing back. I can provide you with the date and the place of this excavation, Bissau 2012, and the producers, collectors, and guardians of that assemblage, the filmmakers Sananada and Flora Gomes. The rest finds its place in the possibility of relation. In 2011, I was introduced by filmmakers Sananada and Flora Gomes to an archive of film and audio material that was stored at the Guinean Film Institute in Bissau, almost in the verge of disappearance. 1 year later, in collaboration with the Guinean filmmakers and the Arsenal Institute for Film and Video Art in Berlin, we made the best efforts, if not to restore the material, at least to get it completely transferred into digital matter. After this process, all the material, as well as two digital copies, returned to Guinea-Bissau in January 2013. Many speculations will follow. Questionable thoughts will be delivered. This is an unofficial, unregulated, undisciplined, irreverent assemblage of images and sounds, sentenced as from sentence, sentences as irrelevant and the object of multiple attempts to be expelled. The assemblage that I will intercept here is as well as ciné-geography, a word that was coined in 2011 by Rose Gray and Kojo Eshun, quoting the concept of geography of Irit Rogov. And they were tracing the solidarity relations linked to these specific liberation movements in Africa, the people's uprising against Portuguese colonialism in Guinea. But it is also a cinebiology, as I recall the perspectivism possibility of the matter and its inscriptions in time. As Rose Gray and Kojo Eshun wrote in 2011, such a project, dealing with these re-excavations and rereadings of militant image, involve a series of encounters with practices and formulations that are often deemed as embarrassing or foolhardy, if not altogether discredited by contemporary historiography. Well, it puzzles me deeply my operation here today in Moscow, bringing back to former Soviet Union an imaginary once produced here, to be sent there, and now found there and sent here. The great masters of montage from this former place left their magical traces in this African Ciné-Archaeology, with shreds of Eisenstein and Vertov productions, as well as the accounts of Alexander Medvedkin Ciné-Train, put on track by Chris Marker. But these images didn't freeze from there till today. They were working, or something was working on them, for 40 years on a West African milieu. Now there's sound. The context of the archive is surprising, signaling the birth of Guinean cinema as part of Amilcar Cabral's struggle for independence from Portuguese colonialism, a war an anachronistic war that lasted from 1963 till 1974 Carnation Revolution. In 1966, during the first Tricontinental Conference in Cuba, the film that we saw is about this conference, Amilcar Cabral delivers his paper, The Weapon of Theory. We need image. No sound. In 1967, Cabral sent young Guineans to Cuba to be trained in medicine, warfare, and cinema after a deal that he made with Cuba and the solidarity support of Cuba and Guinea's struggle. Four of these young Guineans, go off to Icaik to learn about filmmaking under the guidance of Santiago Alvarez. But first, they are introduced to the Spanish language and practice voluntary work. Some of that work is not profitable, but for learning the experience of the common, and, as Sana put it, to learn how to be humble. To be humble is to be next to humus, to the earth, to the soil, to be earthed, to not inflate a loose contact from the ground, to stay close to the ground. I mean, all the footage I'm showing to you from the beginning, they are all from this this cinegeography, or Ciné-Archaeology, as I call it. Here is Sananada, the filmmaker. I'm going to introduce just a small excerpt of one archive sessions we did in Guinea-Bissau, where Sana is commenting these images, and in a mobile cinema we did for 1 month, making 14 stations in the country.
Arlene, anestesista que está lá no fundo, camisa anestesista, está na Canchungo Gosto. Nós era, portanto, o primeiro contingente de 25 estudantes, depois vem mais outros que vêm para o hospital. Era que é bem reforço, mas na 72, 71 chega mais outro contingente, mais tinha mais nove, né? Ela Aurélia, ela é laboratorista. Mas eu morro lá. Ela fina grande, não colega, era nós 4 baixos de cinema, fina é um deles, ela era o único enviado na metade. Era Teresa Cabral, ela que era não responsável, ela que fosse o Manuela. Se fosse o trabalho voluntário, é simbólico. Simplesmente para ser muito provocar o melhor, para um pensar como um diploma que não era na receita. O homem que não faz foto, ele é no treinador de câmara de cinema, deles. Esse é o Jambadam de Mansore, de Kutal Mambongo. Emilia Camara, Antônia Biagi, Injai, Injai Farsia, ele fazia desenvolvimento no colega, a nossa quadra que vai entre os dois que viram a música da prova. Essa alguém lhe forma, eu vai lhe posso formar. Eu fazia controlador aéreo, isso na União Soviética. Você está em imigração em Lisboa. O primeiro mulher que forma para controlar avião, ele está contra piloto, como que não ia dar para ele ou para dar voo. Eu nem de luta, ele era órfão de luta. Zinha saia de chão, ele vai ir agora assim.
This okay, I put another image so there's no. Takes always so long. Sorry. This cinegeography is both a victim and eventually a survivor of the threats of today's dominating discourse. The derbies left by what Derrida called the triumphant phase of morning work. I quote. Marx is dead, communism is dead, very dead, and along with his hopes, its discourses, its theories, and its practice. It says, long live capitalism, long live the market, here's the survival of economic and political liberalism. So this dominant discourse also expelled words like humility and solidarity from its lexicon. This voluntary work, and embedded humility, was what set in motion the Guinean film production and the magnetism that created this cinematic assemblage. In 1972, the Guinean filmmakers returned from Cuba to start documenting the ongoing war of liberation against Portugal, and later the building of an independent nation. In 1979, Chris Marquer spent some months there working with the young Guineans, and the archive perfectly mirrors the tension inherent to his work between militant cinema and an essayistic, poetic, engaged cinematic practice. The archive, through its films and newsreels from abroad, also reflects the solidarity movements and many other allied countries. The heterogeneous assemblage of films and audio material totals about 40 hours of footage and 200 hours of sound. This includes the remains of film productions of Guineans, but also countries that supported the struggle, like Cuba, Sweden, GDR, Senegal, USSR, Netherlands, France, China, India, and Algeria. Chris Marker left several film copies there during his stay in '79. Among this collection, we'll find also films against the apartheid movement, anti-apartheid movement, and also anti-Vietnam War films. And I'm going to show you now this one. A mosaic depicts two women. Both seem to be frozen in a transmission trance. Their arms are the wires establishing a connection. The black woman carrying a child has her arms stretched as if she is gifted with some magical powers transferred through a superhero wrist that sets a circular magnetic field in motion. The other woman is in frontal position with a raised hand and seems to be the medium of this magnetization and extends the chain of a passing force beyond the mosaic. Cut, another woman. Here is a three-dimensional sculpture, also in an immobile transmission. Her hand is stretched vertical in front of the face, the pioneer greeting. Pan to the right. Children, mostly black, coming out of the Ivanov boarding school. They are probably properly dressed for the cold winter. They laugh and run towards the snow to play a game of war, a snowball fight, an imaginary that had no precedence as an image before. During the War of Independence, the Guineans, during the struggle, they declared their unilateral independence in a secretly event on the 20th of September in 1973. This was a very interesting moment of the war, because it totally changed the situation of the war. To declare independence, it means it's not a colonized country with some terrorists struggling, but it is an independent country that is occupied. So it was a very interesting, unique, diplomatic event. In the following November of '73, these images are from that date, a series of ceremonies take place in the bushes of the liberated zones. Ambassadors from Romania, Yugoslavia, Algeria and Senegal, as well as Soviet Union, delivered the credentials of the recognition of the new state. The magic forest of the animist culture, not far from the ruins of defeated Portuguese headquarters, became the auditorium for the theater of public alliances. I think it's fascinating, this kind of imaginary where there's all these attempts at creating national representation, ceremony, but everything is happening with an architecture that is a very precarious, specific architecture that was in the bushes, but everything happens exactly like in the Kremlin palace. I think this is the Soviet representative, the message. The Kremlin Congress Center is displayed as an anthropomorphic machine. Models, in the Bressonian sense, test the architecture as the expansion of their hands, ears, mouth, and eyes. The auditorium is both a place to gather and a place to screen films that can also reflect the recordings of those moments. This opulent cinema is unfolding its possibilities, a place for communing, a place for discussion, reflection, an expanded body. I mean, I'm very ignorant about this film, and I think that's also the interesting here, because for sure there's people in this room that knows more about this fragment than I could ever know, or the people in Guinea could ever know, but it's also part of this kind of excavation site. And I think it's also interesting to think about these images being in Africa and Guinea, and how they reflect to what was representation there. And even if that we didn't show actually in this last trip, we didn't show these particular images, but this, I think it's also an interesting area. This I think is very interesting, because it's the image that was shot in the Congress that is projected in the Congress. There's all this dimension of many layers of reflection. The Black Sea and Seagulls. Young pioneers from various tricontinental countries act in front of the camera. They happily untie their red neck scarves that tie them to a certain national origin, and at the same time undress the threat to that origin. This gesture is repeated child by child. The unequal triangles of fabric are flattened and on the ground as the children, hands carefully caress them in a gesture of validation and honor. Then the edges touch each other. The small pieces of triangle deprived identity merge into one gigantic patchwork, a kaleidoscopic ritual of montage. These images were then sent to Guinea, images that were saying, let's join, let's connect. But these images were expelled, as well as their promises, and now they re-emerged and look at us. The colored triangles became the filters of lenses that spot us. Something like what Didi Uberman said, the celluloid is not an attractive substitute of what was happening in the past to something displayed in the image, but eventually it's a contact point, a transfer, a channel, a two-sided corridor. I like these images even if they were an instrument of Soviet propaganda depicting international friendship and goodwill between people and to stress the Soviet Union's own imperialistic intentions. I think we can reach the point of looking at these images as introducing a new imaginary, as a materialization of an anti-nationalist and an anti-racist performance that was about commonality and togetherness. At the same time, it's interesting that pioneer means who goes first, who does something first. When I use the word kaleidoscope, it is because it joins this idea of the multiple and the fragmented joined together in a good form, to look through. That's the decomposition of kaleidoscope, the good form to look through. And the good form is always the ethical one. But what is the difference in looking at these images today and at the same images in the 60s and the 70s, when they were produced and were spreading around this performative inscription of the New International? Today, these triangle scopes look at our times more than we are able to look back through their times. They say, I became a Benetton campaign, or they say, I was used to set up the production of a tradable charity materialized in the neo-colonial NGO's business of washing consciousness. Maybe they say these things.
Arte y movimiento.
We can also think about the kaleidoscope not only as a scope of multiple visibilities, but also potential vanishing points or of becoming of multiple disappearances. Are these images of defeat or defeated images? Are these fragments the sharpener of war of imaginaries? What is the value of re-energizing these solid images? What happens if we join multiple defeated images? An institutional statement I was confronted with when I was interested about this archive, or at least originally I was not going to do the work that I did, but actually I was just pointing at the archive and going to institutions and saying, there's something that is important to save, please do something. And I had following answer. This archive is irrelevant, and this was what happened in at least 3 situations I had. This archive is irrelevant. Archive, a word that derives from arche. I will quote Derrida because it's very useful here. Archive and archaeology derives from arche, the commencement, the beginning, and the archon, the commandment, the order. So this name apparently coordinates 2 principles in one. The principle according to the nature of history, that there where things commence, where things begin, physical, historically, and ontologically, but also the principle according to law, there where man and God's command, there where authority and the social order are exercised, in this place from which order is given. So, since the word archive is connected with being, beginning, and authority, I decided to deconstruct not the word archive, but actually the word irrelevant. So this archive is irrelevant. The statement itself and its institutional source are not, I'm not going to tell where it comes from, but I'm going to focus on the etymological and semantic and political operation implicit in the concept of irrelevant. To say this archive is irrelevant is both a statement dependent from intrinsic and extrinsic principles, and at the same time a condemnation. An object is reduced to a state of flatness without relief and unrelieved. The signifier relevant does not operate alone, but is rather always associated with a certain task achieved within a system. Something that is relevant to a system is something that assists that system. It could be concluded that when the condemnation, this archive is irrelevant, is stated, it also means this archive does not assist a certain system to achieve a certain goal. However, I was not interested in re-evaluating the relevance of my object, of the archive, but by simply shifting it to another system where it becomes relevant, and not even looking at this inversion of relevance, that would be this archive is depressed. I prefer to attempt to deal with the multiplicities of irrelevancies, since my task is not to assist any system to achieve a goal. The logic of relevance operates within a vertical, hierarchic power relations system in which relevance always performs the task of sustaining that verticality. It's about operating on a horizontal field. For me, the idea is to operate on a horizontal field where matter is observed in relation. Jump a little bit.
Contenti per vedere come moja mkusa inédito para crianças que não cresci, para não jovem e com próprio aqueles que mati quase no tempo antigo. E mkusa só quando eu pedi essa comitiva que vem para vir mostrar esse filme e de como se me falando e tem 100 minutos desse filme de 100 horas de tempo e sobra agora só 40, né? Então, é 40 que sobra, é fácil somar, para que ela nem minuto, para perder mais, para não perder e fica com 40. Então, para conseguir guardar ela, assim, para as crianças que não vêm para conta, não vêm seguir a história de Guiné-Bissau.
I think I'm going to jump something because it's getting late. No. How long do I have? 5 minutes. Okay, so I will jump. The image I showed you before was also the reaction to we always, I mean, in this mobile cinema we always showed images commented by Sana or Flora, and then on the end there was always a kind of an open arena of discussion, and this was, I think it's very interesting, this reaction, because is exactly asking the archive not to be edited, not to be cut, so to keep it like exactly as it was, as fragment as we were always showing it and activating it, but not this idea of like cutting, making films or finishing that state. I will jump to something a little bit crazy because this is eventually my thoughts for eventually production in the future. And I will and it's connected with materiality, with the idea of this archive as materiality and not only as representation. And I will quote Eduardo Viveiro de Castro. He says the original condition that is common between animal and humans is not animality, but humanity. What is actually a very interesting, puzzling idea. Thus, the first thing to do is to cut off the relation between subject and the human. Thus, subjectivity is not the synonym of humanity. The subject is a thing, the human is another. The subject is an object function that one can find deposited on the surface of everything. Subjectivity is a fusion of multiplicity, not of unity. Miriam Makeba, the great embodiment of Pan-Africanism in voice, and I'm not going to talk about her now. It would be a great, challenge to start that. But she's one of the most important figures of Pan-Africanism. Miriam Makeba emerges here from the ruins of a film, and you have the feeling that her forces of this embodied Pan-Africanism would come back to infection of the celluloid tainted by the course of neocolonialism and the neoliberal viruses. So what I want to point here is that from this idea of a ciné-geography that maybe connects with Philip and this Ciné-Archaeology, that is a little bit what was our case, that was not just an archive, was actually the ruins of an archive. Maybe we could also jump to this idea of a cinebiology, because there was always something happen in this celluloid film that is acting, that is always moving and also changing and activating and changing the image, or eventually even a cinepathology. So the celluloid disease, the vinegar syndrome, is not a metaphor, but a phenomenon that creates awareness of the animal gelatin as a component of the medium of cinema. War is not only channeled through the representations in the image, but also a part of the film materiality. The awareness of this dual nature, material and representation inscribed on film, is understood here as energy, intensity, frequency, and maybe molecular conflict. The ruin comprises both potential and loss. So maybe my proposition would be, with all of this, not to look at the past, but to create a transmission to channel again certain notions that are deactivated. I like to see these images, animal gelatin gifted with perceptivity, the quality animate or inanimate subjects have to occupy on a point of view. So perceptivity is this, like that something can occupy points of view. The moment when they can become prosopomorphic agents. So prosopomorphic agents is actually coined also by Viver de Castro with this idea that something that it can be an agent of something else. It's not. It is like a body that with the agents can transform. The agency can be a different one, even if the body is the same. And these prosopomorphic agents can affect and can be able to affect the business and power. So I think that's a little bit the idea that, for me, that I think we should be able, or we could be able to address and to use these images, activating certain things, but thinking that they can, the agency can be changed. Or even some agency that is inside, even with the pioneer images, there's an agency that is inside of them that can be useful today, even if in those times it was a bit complicated to think about it, what they were doing at that time. But eventually today they can have new agencies. So that's all. I would like to just to finish. I mean, I didn't give you any of these things that were given by other colleagues. That's why when I was. How can I put this? I want to be more generous and give you also this image. This is the first image that I took of the archive in 2011. And I also wanted to tell you that this was really a commission in the sense that Rasha and Koyo asked me if there was a relation in this archive, you know, a visible relation with this archive and Soviet Union. And I think, of course, there is. And but the way we unfolded the project that is ongoing since almost 4 years now, it's very important that I tell you that we did maybe 25 events, but always with one of the filmmakers present. And it was also the way we created all kind of rules to make these filmmakers that are alive, and they were actually, this history is totally silenced and not known. So that we created many rules, so they were always present. And me doing this today, it's something different because it was about connecting. So Sana is not here, but I think it's also important that these filmmakers are also, you know, present and active, and because they also changed, you know, with our researches that come from other times. So thank you so much.
I was just wondering, when you organize these events, I don't know if you call them events or how do you...
we call it commented screenings.
Screenings. So you record them, I guess. You record the filmmakers' kind of reaction to the material, the comments, and you said you set up a lot of rules, and I was just wondering...
Just going through some images to show you one of the events. This was the archive when it arrived.
Wow.
In these boxes.
Beautiful boxes.
This was the process of digitalization. Actually, I can say something because we decided to digitize everything from also the soundtracks and the information. Sometimes there is Orvo, you know, the marks of the film, so you know where the film material is coming from. So this is the project, this ongoing project. It's called Luta, caba, inda, and it's based on these 4 reels that we found. That is very symptomatic for what is our proposal as well. Is like never to close, never to finish. This ongoing, and the title of this film that was not finished is called "The Struggle Is Not Over Yet," and it's totally like as if the title was like cursing the film that would never be finished. So there's something, you know, also poetic about these issues. And this is just one image of the first event we did with Sana in 2012 in the Arsenal, where there was really moments where the material was still coming from the digitalization process. So actually, sometimes he was confronted with footage in the cinema for the first time. So he was reacting to them. It was like it was also this idea of transporting the editing room or the moment of viewing images where you are reflecting and to put it inside of the cinema with public. So that was a little bit the idea of like this, I mean, the whole idea of the Luta, caba, inda project has to do with this, like, not, you know, that was found like that, so let's keep it like that, and let's operate in this idea of something that was never finished, where there was so many attempts to destroy it, and silence it. So, and how come we can, and that was like, that's why it's difficult to channel the project when we are not doing one of these sessions with the filmmakers, because
I might be able to answer this question, but I'm concerned about the 100 hours down to 40 hours. Was that reduction because so much film was destroyed, or what's the story about the 100 hours down to 40 hours?
No, actually I think it was even more than 100, but there were several moments of where the thing shrinks. So the production stops in 1980 when there was a coup d'etat that actually ended the socialist period that lasted from 1974 to 1980. So coup d'etat in 1980. Nino Vieira takes power, and the brother of Amilcar Cabral returned. He goes to Cuba, I think, first, and on exile. So from there, this kind of production stops. There is one film that is produced, and is state paid. That's actually one of the most important films. That is called Morto Nega. That is not part of this archive. This was a film that. It's a very important reenactment of the wartime. It's a fiction film. So this production is on hold, and it's actually a little bit how you see there's like at least 3 films in montage process. There's Luta, Caba, Inda. There's a film about women that is also interesting, and so the 1980 stops. It's also when Chris Marker was there, so he's there in 1979, so he goes back, and then there's no continuation of this kind of militant film production. And then there's a war in 98. There's a civil war in 98, and actually where Senegal was involved. Koyo knows maybe more that the war with Guinea, where Senegal participated in 98. So, and in that war. Or after that, I think it was after the war, the military from Senegal that occupied a lot of places to stations, they also took out the archive, out of place. So it was basically thrown on the streets. And the filmmakers knew about it some weeks later when it was already raining on top of them, and they were like saving what they could save. So I think they saved like eventually a half of what was there. That's what they told me, like, it's very difficult. So from that part, the rest was stored, but in terrible conditions, and there was raining inside. It was raining inside. It's too hot, too cold, like everything. So, and when we finally in 2011 we activated this project, and we sent a technician to see the material. We separated, and what was there, we only were able to digitize half of it. Of what was there. So it is already like, it was shrinking in very different moments in history. But I have to say, the way we did it, because as I told you, the archive was considered irrelevant by technician and also by the FIAF. So the FIAF is the Foundation of Archives, International Federation of Archives. This project would have never been possible in the context, because the material was so destroyed that you would have to have a lot of money to recover it before it goes to a scanner. So that's why we call it a little bit a guerrilla digitalization, because what we did, we found a person, that is the guy that was before there, that was an engineer that was experimenting doing a scanner. It was by chance, actually, Arun Faroki, that died 1 year ago. He was the person that gave me the contact, told me, Filipa, I know this person, he's experimenting on scannings, so maybe he can help you. And only because of that, because no normal enterprise, ARI, or that have scanners would ever pick up this material and put it in their machines, because it contaminates everything. The vinegar syndrome is a disease that is it contaminates, so everything can get destroyed. So what Rainer did, he was so enthusiastic. For him, it was an experiment, and then what he said is that I have my second prototype is almost ready. So you take my first prototype, and it's yours. So basically, you can do whatever you, and we destroy the whole machine, you know, by passing these films with all the diseased inscriptions inside. So everything was passing, and everything was getting dirty, destroyed. So, but it was, you know, the way we found. So everything was like, you know, experiments. Everybody was experimenting. Nothing was at the rule. So, you know, film specialists actually would insult us almost if they know we were doing. But this was the way we, you know, since nobody wants this, and the filmmakers wanted, we are very interested in it. So that's how everything actually, in the Arsenal as well. Arsenal is an institute of film, but they are very, very interesting in experimenting also and going over the borders of what is archives, what is film, what is. I mean, we were using cinemas as experimental rooms, so. So everything it went in this kind of this. I just comment on this image because this is very beautiful. It's Anita Fernandes that was a friend of Chris Marker that went there after he was there. So after he did the Saint-Soleil, and she made a beautiful work because she had also the scripts of the women film that we didn't have in the Guinea. It was, she worked with them on workshops, and then she's reading here a letter that Chris Marker wrote to her about the cinema ideas of how to go on. It's a little bit paternalistic, this letter, but it's very interesting because he's really caring and engaged on how these filmmakers they need support, what can we do? And up there's also a postcard that is sent through Dakar, that Chris Marker sent to Anita through Dakar. I mean, this would be like this is actually almost another presentation, but there's also this element of a magnet. There was some films that came to the archive through the project as well, like this one. So people that come and say, "Hey, I also was there. I also have this film," and so this was the case of Un balcon sur Afrique that Anita did in Guinea in 1980, and actually she offered this film also to the collection, and so on. So it's very, you know, it's too long to condense in such a short presentation.
Thank you, Filipa. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Katerina. Thank you, Philippe. Thank you, Rasha. Thank you, Koyo, for having the great idea of having the seminar. Thank you for everyone that came. Спасибо большое, что вы пришли.